various school districts, and currently I'm a mental wellness district counselor. I don't know, I don't like to brag about myself like everybody else. I just feel like I'm just a counselor at heart, and that's what I do. And we're all here just helping kids and students to get to where they need to get. So that's a little bit about me.
Thank you, Katarina. So as Kat said, our goal today is to share our experience. Personally, the most gratifying moments for me in my career was when I was running groups. So we're here to share our experience, some tips, lessons learned throughout the way. We're going to try to make it very conversational. I know that talking about groups is an extensive topic, and we're here for 90 minutes. So naturally, we wouldn't have all the time, right, to cover everything that it encompasses in group counseling. For me, it took a whole graduate program. It was like 2 semesters of group counseling to get myself to feel comfortable. So we're going to try to touch on the basics, give you most of it, give you examples, templates that you can run with and implement as soon as you finish this webinar. So we're hoping that you'll find the resources we're sharing with you helpful. And then most importantly, we want to reassure you, you all have a master's in counseling, okay? So I know that all of you have had the training. Sometimes we just need to practice, right? We just need to get that back in the groove, hear other people's experiences, maybe hear what resources other people are sharing. So we're hoping that we'll all chime in. We all have expertise. Together, we know so much more. So we do welcome you to help us by incorporating your resources, your thoughts into the chat. As we go through the slides, please feel free to just add your ideas and your insights, okay? So we're here in this together. We have created a participant guide for you and an effort to provide, again, a one-stop shop, which Lorraine will be posting in the chat one more time. Here you can see our contact information, a copy of the presentation for today. We will be recording, again, we're recording this webinar to allow our colleagues who are not able to join us today to check the materials we're sharing with you at their leisure. And again, we have tons of resources. I've reached out actually to practicing counselors or counselors of the year, asking them for words of wisdom, where are their go-to resources, templates, lessons, you name it. Everything I would have wanted when I was in your position starting a group, it's right there, okay? So, and again, if you have other resources, please send them my way or put them in the chat, and we can go back and compile them and add them to the participant guide. So again, our goal here is to work together. School counselors thrive through collaboration, so this is what we're here for. So please take a moment to take a look at the participant guide. But before we get started, let's model our SDL signature practices by engaging in a welcoming activity. So very similar to what we do with our students when we begin our group. So we start with an icebreaker, and we thought we can start with something aspirational. So we thought of this prompt. So go with it with us. If you could be a superhero, what would be your superpower and why? And I can go first. I know this might be an overused one, but I truly feel like this is the one I really want now. I want to be able to teletransport to tropical weather, like wherever there's the sun, a nice beach, the Caribbean, I don't care. It's something that I can just go away for an afternoon, a weekend, and come back to the work life, right? I think now, especially when things are so difficult and we are navigating so many challenges, it's important that we spend time and engage in the activities that bring us joy. And for me, tropical weather brings me joy. So I think that's the reason why I want to teletransport. But please go ahead and feel free to share with us in the chat. I want to hear what everybody else is thinking. Kat, do you have one you want to share?
Oh my gosh, I'm just like everybody else. I'm reading everybody else's on the chat, and the ability to make, oh, I love this. The ability to make food calorie free. I'm all about that.
No more traffic. Yes, that was actually my first choice many years ago.
Everybody wants to be teleported. They are so busy.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we're all going to teletransport into a nice, cozy island while we're learning all this and sharing resources together. We should have had a nice background with like some nice beach behind us. Huh?
I love this teleportation. Well, guess what? You know, with this whole telehealth, we are teleporting.
Thank you, everybody, for participating. It's so nice to see everyone. All right, Katarina, so I'm going to turn it to you to guide us through our poll today.
So we want to get an idea of where you're at, your experience on running small groups. So we wanted to kind of take a quick poll of, where are you? I'm a beginner, I've never ran a group, or some experience, but I do need a refresher, or very experienced. So this gives us an idea of where you're at and, what we hope to bring to you guys at this point. So it looks like we're looking at the polls now as they're coming in. So again, this is a way to kind of measure where everybody's at.
Nice. So thank you for participating. I see about 73 of us have participated and they're coming in still. Thank you. So, okay, just like we imagined, some of us have done them. We just need a refresher. Perfect. Okay, that's exactly what we hope for. Again, so much, to cover in group counseling. So our goal is just to give you some of the pointers, some, I guess our experience, our best practices, and then give you resources. So right on. Thank you very much for participating.
63% have some experience, Liz.
Nice. Okay. All righty. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and get started then. So I'll share with you the learning objectives for today. Let me exit this. So we have 4 overarching goals for today. So they are to review the role of the school counselor in group counseling, and talk about the difference between an open and closed group, review strategies for planning an engaging group counseling session, which is huge. I think that's why we're going to spend most of our time today. And then identifying data elements that can highlight the impact that you're making, so your effectiveness in running your small group counseling. So again, as we go through the slides, please feel free to add in your ideas. If you have questions, please post them. We'll try our best to be checking the chat and monitor and answer the questions as we go through the slides. But if we don't get to them, we'll be sure to go back and read and maybe address them also at the end. So we have them at a time at the end. Just a reminder, please, as you walk in, please mute yourself so that we can eliminate the background noise. And let's jump right in. Okay, so this is the Ask a Position statement, which is the school counselor role in group counseling. And we have attached a copy of this in your participant guide. I do highly encourage you to read that through. It's a 2-page document. But I thought we would just highlight some of the important elements that I think it's important that we just be reminded of, just to reassure, make sure we're all on the same page. And the first one is that we use group counseling as an efficient and effective way to providing direct service to our students, right? And we're focusing in the domains of academic, career, social, emotional development. And as we begin to know our students and identify supplemental needs, or we find issues or situational concerns, we tailor our program to support students. So we close the achievement gap or the opportunities in between. So we're using our groups to be more effective in reaching more students. And group counseling is an integral part of our school counseling program, and it should be supported by our administrators and school districts. And I know that planning for small group counseling is a challenge. It's a challenge because there's not a lot of time. We have time constraints. It takes planning. So, but nonetheless, we wanted to emphasize that it is an important and integral part of our school counseling program. So in hopes that we do have some administrators on the line, I wanted to emphasize that this is something that we do, that it's part of how we support our students with supplemental levels of support, and we need to continue to advocate for this part. The next component is that school counselors prioritize groups offerings based on data analysis. So again, we're using data to identify our students that need extra support, and then we also use data to identify the topics that would help our students' needs. So we're not just creating or doing random acts of kindness, as Trish Hatch would say, but we're very intentional in our services. Next, school counselors have the responsibility to screen potential group members and address informed consent, purpose of the group, the goals, limits to confidentiality, and voluntary participation. And Kat's going to be speaking more about this later on in the presentation. But I just wanted to emphasize that screening is a super important process, or part of the process when we're running groups. Once we have identified the students and the topics, the next step is to find out and reflect on whether bringing the students together would be the right course of action. I can't tell you many stories, when I was running my queries, looking at my DNF list, that where the natural perhaps advice was just get the kids together, put them in a group, they need study skills. And when you got to interview the students, when I got to meet them, there was underlying factors, right, that were really creating those barriers and was really impeding them from being successful in their classes. So perhaps getting them into a study skills class wouldn't have fixed the problem. There was other things that I needed to address. So again, it's not just about lumping students together just because they have a common denominator, which is earning D's and F's, but that we're spending some time getting to know our students, interviewing them, finding out if they want to join the group, if they see the value in joining the group, making sure that the group would be beneficial to them. And again, Kat will be speaking more about this. And also making sure that the dynamics of the groups that the students you're bringing together would work, to see if the student would be impacting the rest and vice versa, right? So you want it to be a supportive environment where the students are supporting each other and impacting each other positively. And that's huge. And the next part is the school counselors do not provide therapy or long-term counseling in schools to address psychological disorders. However, school counselors are prepared to recognize and respond to student mental health crises and needs. School counselors address those barriers to student success by offering instruction that enhances awareness of mental health and short-term intervention to include small group counseling until the student has been connected to the available community resources or perhaps even our school resources. I know that we're bringing in other mental health specialists into our teams. And I also want to acknowledge that the school counselor training varies throughout our region, right? Some of us may have expanded training, a clinical background, or a licensure, just like Kat, who has an LPCC. And others may not. Like, I don't have one, I have a doctorate, but I never went into a clinical setting. And that's okay. Most of us have been exposed to some sort of counseling theory. So only you know what you're comfortable with, what your scope of practice is, and we need to just stay true to that. And if you do have a clinical licensure or background, you want to make sure you're having that conversation with your team, with your leadership about what your role will be. Will you be spending most of your time at tier 3, the intensified levels of support? Is that what you were expected to focus on? Is that what you were hired to do? The end goal is that we're making sure that we are attending to what we're commended to do, but that we're also advocating for students to have access to the universal and supplemental supports, that there's the resources allocated at each level through the continuum, right? So for today's presentation, we're going to be focusing on the traditional role, which is a non-clinical emphasis. I'll turn it to you, Kat. Okay, you're muted.
So here's the question. How do you know when a student is beyond your scope of practice? And I think this is something that we want to kind of talk about because that helps us understand what we're there for, right? So if you guys want to share on the chat, then we can kind of like look and maybe share amongst ourselves. How do you know when your student is beyond your scope of practice? How would you know? Please feel free to share.
Okay, I see some comments coming in. They need long-term and ongoing counseling to meet outside the needs of others. Okay, perfect. Thank you, Ashley. When after a few sessions, the student doesn't show any progress. Yes, thank you, Rosie.
Excellent. Yes. So I think like we pretty much are assessing, right? Students' need for counseling. So we're kind of like assessors. That's what I look at as counselors. We're checking to see if we can intervene. Is this going to be short-term, long-term? This is one way. So one of the things that I want to kind of, I put together what we call an infographic, and this is what we do every day. And this is what we call psychological first aid. So part of the psychological first aid I use, and everybody does, is we are sort of vetting to see if this is a participant that maybe will do well in group counseling. We'll look to see, like I said, we're looking to see if we can do interventions. This is non-clinical. We do this every way. This is a very formal label, but it happens to us every every day as we're dealing with students in crisis mode or non-crisis mode. We're looking to see where they're at. So I put together this infographic that will help you kind of decide, is this person someone who could be good for group? Is this person someone that you would be able to stabilize? And I'm going to go over it fairly quick here, but I wanted you guys to see this. If you want to go ahead and start the first slide. So what we do in psychological first aid is we really start off with engaging that student. We build rapport, we empathize, we validate, and we normalize those emotions that they might be feeling. This is what we do every single day, each one of us. Then we go into section 2. We start exploring. If you want to go through the next one. We do the active listening. We're looking for assessing the frequency and intensity of what it is that's impeding them. We're checking to see the impaired level of function, and we're sussing out risk factors. So we're identifying social supports. This is what you guys do every single day. And I just put a little visual in here because it helps me visualize what I'm doing on a day-to-day basis. And then lastly, we're basically providing empowerment, right? So Lucy, you want to go for the next slide? We're empowering those students. I think you got to go to there we go. And we're hoping that we're stabilizing the situation, whatever it is that they're encountering. We're inquiring about their social supports. We're looking to see if we need to connect them with other outside services. This is what you guys do on a day-to-day basis. So I just wanted to put a picture to it so that you can see it. So psychological first aid in crisis mode, and that's what you guys are doing, boots on the ground. Like some of you guys shared, when do you know that it gets to be beyond your scope of practice? When all these things have been employed and you see no change or no stabilization. So we want to go ahead and keep this in mind when you're working with students. Where are they at? Has the 6 weeks or the 4 weeks that you intervened made a difference? Are they possibly a candidate for a group that you might be seeing a trend in? So this is something that I use to help me see what I'm doing every day, because we're doing it rapid fire with multitude of students. And this is kind of my little infographic that I put together. You want to go for the next one, please?
So the next part is rationale for group counseling. So this is the second learning objective that we have for today. And again, I'm sure this is going to be a review, but so we use group counseling to ultimately to help support our students overcome issues impeding their achievement and for success. And we are helping students identify problems, causes, alternatives, and possible consequences so they can make decisions and take appropriate action. And then finally, our groups are always planned. They're goal focused or evidence-based and short-term in nature. So why do we do small group? What's the ultimate goal? Well, the ultimate goal is that we are able to provide that space for students to develop that supportive relationships in a group setting, to engage them in positive peer relationships, which is why the screening process is so important, that we measure the dynamics to make sure that this will be the right setting for them and they would be able to increase their social support, develop that insight for themselves and for others, and then ultimately be able to achieve that healthier personal adjustment. So as school counselors, we are facilitators in the mix. The learning and the growth that students engage in happens through their reflections, through their sharing of stories, happens organically. We're there to provide the resources, the activities, the reflections, and you just let the magic flow. That was my favorite part of school counseling or group counseling, when I would see the students think about a topic, reflect, and then make those connections, bond with each other, keep each other accountable, and then really strengthen those bonds where they kept that friendship and that support even after the group finished. So that's really what you're trying to do. You're trying to bring that space and that structure so that students can grow and support each other through their like systemic program. Then here, next is once you have identify your group, right? Your students, you're using your group counseling to be intentional. Again, it's short-term in nature and it's data-driven. Sessions, you want to keep them between 4 to 6 I mostly stayed within 6. 8 was rare. You have to be able to embed that in the calendar, but within 6 sessions or 6 weeks was what I normally averaged. The size 3, 4, 4 to 12 students, I don't think I ever went over 12. Anything over 12 makes it very difficult, right? And then you're using data to identify your students again. So your data is helping you determine what students need the help. And then you begin to outsource by looking at the attendance, the academic, the discipline data. And sometimes, yes, now that we're looking into universal screeners, that's getting more popular, then we have that data to also refer to, or the referrals to help us identify our students and the topics. Once we have found the students and we've come up with the topics where we come together to think about as a team, what would be the activities that would be supporting our students' growth? So we think about what skill sets are we hoping to develop in our students? And again, that's a team decision. It should be happening as a team, not just you individually coming up with the plan, because again, we're trying to use evidence-based programs. So if you bring in the idea or the expertise of a school psychologist or an MFT into your team, which is what we're growing towards MTSS now, then you have a very comprehensive support. I think I saw somewhere in the chat ask, what if we need extended social supports? Well, if you're bringing in your school psychologist, your speech therapist, and you have that idea, that expanded knowledge that you could be supporting each other with and creating the evidence interventions that you need. So again, we're coming in together to find out what activities will be supporting our students. And this is where the mindsets and behaviors come into play. This is what we are trained in. The school counselors have the ASCA mindsets and behaviors. And again, these are research-based standards that help us create those activities for our students, because we're hoping to be able to help our students gain those appropriate knowledge, attitudes, and skills needed to achieve that particular goal that we have in mind. For example, here, I have an example that I added here for you, which is, if your goal is to support students' conflict management skills, and in this example, the group decided to focus on mindset number 1, which is nurturing the students' belief in the development of whole self, including a healthy balance of mental, social, emotional, and physical well-being. So again, what you're doing now is you're nurturing that student mindset, that belief, and then that standard drives your intentionality, your tone, and your message through the group. Throughout the 6 sessions, or perhaps a couple sessions, you'll be choosing as a team. And the same thing happens with the behavior standards. You're using those 4 standards that I have there to help you come up with the ideas, with the icebreakers, with the engaging activities, the reflective questions, and so forth. So again, all of our activities are carefully chosen, and the activities are helping us reach those appropriate knowledge, attitudes, and skills needed to foster that one goal or develop that goal. And then here, once you have a plan, you have the topic, you've chosen your standards, then we think about an action plan. And this is super important to keep note of. This is a new edition of the ASCA model, where they provide an action plan where you can go through the standards and check to see, okay, what activities would I be using to achieve this standard? And then the students you're going to be targeting. And then there's a results report, because we should be trying, or we should be planning to showcase how our students are being impacted based on our interventions. And I know that we're not really good about bragging. When we do have success stories, we tend to be very modest as school counselors, but we must keep the data, and not just to brag or to show the impact, but really so that we can analyze and see how effective our interventions are, so that we can make adjustments as needed. We can also check to see about how we're doing our interventions, or group facilitating is done with fidelity. Perhaps it's not working because we're not following, the curriculum or the evidence-based practice with fidelity. So that needs to be analyzed and reflected upon and discussed as a group. So again, you want to be able to use these templates to help you record your program and get organized as far as what standards you're going to be using, and also use a results report so you can analyze your impact. And then lastly, I want to remind you again that everything that we do is with the ultimate goal to impact our students' attitudes, skills, and knowledge. And just as a refresher, the attitude is referring to the beliefs our students have regarding their ability to demonstrate that desired behavior that we hope our students will be able to achieve or connect their behavior for their success. So these could be like, I believe, or I feel statements. Do they believe they can, the high school diploma is important, for example, and having them articulate that. With the knowledge would be, of course, the students are learning what we're hoping that they will learn after the lesson. So you're creating questions that help you determine whether they have understood the content. And then the skill is assessing whether the student can perform a task. Sometimes that can only be measured up through a completion of a pre and post test. For example, when a student is able to complete a career interest inventory, and you have a product, or they complete a 4-year plan. So that is your way of showing, okay, X amount of students completed in this plan. So here, therefore, they have achieved this skill set. So again, we're using our counseling skills, our techniques, our counseling theories, right? And mixing all that with a mix of curriculum materials, activities to help us achieve that desired behavior change. So through our attitude, skills, and knowledge, we're slowly allowing the student to reflect and transform that behavior. So those are all the elements that you're using, you're measuring through the pre and post. And the pre and post is really what helps you create those graphs that help you create that results page, which you see right there, based on how students grew from their pre and then their post, and all those 3 elements is how you show the impact and that you show in your programs. Is there anything you wanted to add on this part, Kat?
No, I think like you said, it's real important that when we do those pre and post, I know a lot of work goes into small group in the beginning, and the part that you really want to share out with your admin is all the work that you guys established. I mean, a lot of times it really looks like once we're in working with students that it just seems like we just put together a group and there was not a lot of footwork done beforehand. So this is an opportunity to showcase some of the work that you actually have done. Not only that, it also shows like, wow, there is a change in the behavior and attitudes, objectively, subjectively. So it's really critical that we go ahead and keep that in mind. And if you don't do it for yourself, because I know that a lot of us are very, we don't like to, just our character is not to brag, but you do it for the students. So remember, you are growing your program, you are creating buy-in, you're creating credibility. So this is one way of doing it.
So the next part is, when is it appropriate to do group or individual? I'll let you take this one, Kat.
I think it's important when we're actually looking and we're seeing a trend, right? We all of a sudden, and this is what we're seeing every day, right? When all of a sudden we're seeing kids who are coming in with the same problem, we want to vet to see if they're ready. Let me give you an example. If all of a sudden we have a trend of a bunch of kids who unfortunately lose their parents or family members and they're grieving, we want to see during our vetting process, is this student ready for group? Is this student really a candidate who is willing to share amongst their group? Or is this student in this state of denial where it's a protective factor that they need to not even go there right now? You would never put a student in a group setting who is dealing with grief, who's not ready to even discuss the loss. So we really want to go ahead and make sure that we're vetting our students and making sure if they're ready to be part of the group. Are they severely emotionally distressed and they are not good participants because their level of function is sort of diminished to a minimal? Do they look like they maybe need more of that, like you said, individual counseling where you're assessing and checking to see if there's other underlying factors that might have not been addressed? So we really want to kind of keep those in mind. Want to go to the next? So open and closed groups. One of the things that we want to keep in mind is open groups. They just offer that fresh input. Those are groups like lunch bunch, study skill groups. And I've seen open groups come into my school, and it's really a nice way to build that connection with your students. There is just that really easy flow of enjoying getting to know your students and also providing a resource for them. Closed groups are more skill building, short term, and they're really intentional and focused. So those are more like I said, the grief group, or maybe a group of like building the self-esteem of students, or areas that you can see that would benefit a student, maybe talking about like what's something that's difficult for them during school year, which a lot of students right now are dealing with, being around social interaction with other students. They felt like they forgot. So this is kind of a more trust building and connection and working with their peers in a more smaller setting, so that you can kind of facilitate some kind of social emotional learning during this process. So that's the difference from one group and another. So we want to keep that in mind. Luce, your voice.
Thank you. Thank you for reminding me. I have my heater running in the background. I didn't want to have that background noise. But thank you, Kat. I think those are really important components. Before we go into the engaging or practices that engage our students in group counseling, I just wanted to give you a gentle reminder. And again, I know that you guys all know this, but I feel like especially now since we're running our stress levels and we're very depleted in our resources, our cognitive resources when we're feeling stressed. Just want to remind you of the power of our words, and that is super real. I can tell you many stories when I didn't approach a student the correct way, and that completely ruined the opportunity for my students to join the group. I think the underlying purpose here is that the students feel supported, right? That they find the purpose in wanting to join the group, and they want to join the group. It should be voluntary. So when you're having that initial conversation, you're interviewing the student, you're going through the needs assessment, you want to portray and use words that will be encouraging, that will show that you're understanding, that you're empathetic, that you care about the child and their growth and their potential to be the best they can be, that you are helping them and asking questions that can help develop that insight in them, anticipate consequences. So if we continue this behavior, what do you think would happen? What would be the ultimate consequence? Well, I would have to blah, blah, blah. Okay, well, is that something that we want? And I always use a word we. Like if I always made it we, it made it less threatening, and they were like listening to me. If I was like, you need to do, then that was always okay. That's it. I can't get anywhere with him. But you help him problem solve. You encourage that change, and again, you're helping with your words encourage and motivate them. You don't use words that can make them shut down and then completely shame them, which is why I always broke my heart when I would be in SSTs and it was like a bashing session. You don't want to have that at all, right? You want the kiddos to feel like, okay, this is an encouraging team. My school counselor cares. She's going to support me. You explain that this would be a group setting where you would be supported by other students, and you'll have myself, perhaps another school counselor, be there to support you along the way. So you use the small group as an avenue for students to connect with other students and create that support system, and never as a punishment. You don't introduce a group as this is the intervention and make it seem like it's a punishment. As a matter of fact, I always call my groups as a club. I want them to feel privileged to be joining, and I feel like it was a cool thing to be a part of. So again, that initial conversation, that's why it takes time, because essentially what you're doing is you're trying to convince the kiddo or get their buy-in to think that joining the group would be beneficial to them, and they would allow that opportunity for them to grow as a team, as a group of members, other students as well. Okay, so now with that reminder, let's go into the engaging component. So Kat and I came together with these three steps, overarching steps, and some of the elements to keep in mind. As you're getting prepared to plan for your groups, you want to make sure, again, that you're setting that purpose, that you're pre-screening, and that you're planning, right? So with the setting the purpose, that entails that you're using data to help you determine the needs and the topics. You can also use your California Healthy Kids survey as part of your data element that you're analyzing as well. That you're running groups that you're passionate about. Again, the kiddos can tell if you're running a group that you just absolutely don't feel any passion for. And I would also recommend, as I mentioned earlier, that you co-facilitate with another colleague. That helps with just combining, your knowledge. Your colleague might be perhaps more knowledgeable in a topic than you are. And it's about, making that cohesive environment that also helps with triaging of some of the situations. You might need someone to be perhaps monitoring the student if someone is being triggered, or whatever may be the case. It just helps to have that support system. And then you want to obtain the buy-in from the students. And again, that's where I would use my needs assessment You're getting the buy-in from the teachers, so the referral forms, and the parents are also involved in the conversation through the informed consent. So the whole point is that you're getting everybody in the loop, that they're engaged in the process, that the teachers see the value, especially if you're going to be running groups during the day that might miss a period of that teacher's class, that they understand, okay, it's fine. They're going to be working towards a skill set. You keep them in the loop. Okay, we're working on this skill set, and have the teacher be your partner and reassuring the student and helping you through the goals. With the pre-screening, Kat, I wanted to ask you, what was your conversation like when you were pre-screening your students, and how did you communicate expectations to your students?
So about now, I think that you guys are probably getting ready to do progress reports. And usually that was the first thing that we would get. All our F students, right? Everybody goes, okay, we want to go ahead and check to see why these students are all getting Fs. So the pre-screening is really like Luce was saying earlier, and something that I'll expand later is, using that psychological first aid that I was talking about, and really kind of assessing what is going on with the student, and making sure, like we talked about, are they ready for group? Is there some underlining issues that maybe need to be addressed? So we kind of want to do a lot of that pre-screening piece, because we don't want to bring in someone who's not ready for group and will unfortunately either torpedo the group or change the dynamics of the group, things like that. So we really want to make sure that's really something that you do ahead of time. And I have to share with you, I'm sure you guys have experienced this. Have you had an admin that will immediately say, okay, you take all these kids, these are our kids that are having all kinds of behavior issues, can you go ahead and take them into that room and fix them? And you're like, what? What do you want? 15 boys, can you take them, Kat? I'm like, no, that's not the way it works. So we really want to go ahead and, like I said, really see if it's is it a group setting that will actually help one another and torpedo each other. So that's one part. And then the plan, right, Luce?
Oh gosh, yes. I can't emphasize this enough. I think, again, I would say that what makes it difficult to run groups is, not having the time. But if you are looking at your data early enough, and you're talking with your admin, and you're creating an action plan where you're involving them in the conversation, and you're saying, okay, here's what I'm hoping to do. Here's my intention. Here are the mindsets we're going to be covering, or the standards. Here are the activities. This is an important part of my program, and get their support to make it a reality. And then you calendar that into your schedule. It's super important. Otherwise, it'll never happen. It'll never happen. So, and then also part of the planning involves preparing those call slips and preparing the reminders ahead of time, because that often too, if you don't get those out and you're not prepared, or your support staff is not supporting you with that, then kids don't show up and they need to be reminded. So that planning is super crucial in the process. Establishing the welcoming and safe environment is very important, and it starts from the very beginning in that first meeting, because the whole point is that we want the kids to come back, right? So we want to make it fun. We want to make it entertaining for them. We don't want to make it seem like we're lecturing them, like, this is what you need to do. But again, we're using our activities, our icebreakers, are leading the conversations, and the kids are learning through those engaging activities. Then we're using open-ended questions to allow them to reflect and learn from each other. Follow-up questions. You did this week, Kat, how did that work? Or how did you do that? Like getting them and feel proud and that you're noticing. And then maybe asking perspective taking, because someone had a different experience, or how did you navigate that? So you're allowing the kids' voice to come into the ground, to come to the space. You're not dominating the conversation, but you're asking the questions so they can chime in. And then again, learning from each other and supporting each other. I always had to be reminded, because I always wanted the kiddos, of course, right, to speak from the very beginning. And then some were shy. And I got to remind myself, okay, it starts with small talk, which is why never skip the icebreaker. The icebreaker helps with the small talk. And then we slowly begin to move through those ideas, and then the opinions. Once you get the students to share their opinion, that means that you have been building that trust, or you built that trust. So just allow for that trust to be built organically. And it might require where you have to be perhaps vulnerable and share a personal story when things were not perhaps perfect for you. Maybe you become vulnerable and say, you know what, I went through that too. I remember I was failing, this class or whatever, the topic may be, but this is how I overcame it. And showing that you're normalizing that challenges are, happen, and it's okay. It's how we navigate them. And that helps a lot of times build that trust. So that helps with creating that engagement as well. We mentioned the pre and post again. We want to use questions to help you show your outcome data and your intentionality and show that your impact at the end. Have fun. Kat, you have all kinds of ideas of having fun. And then keeping the teachers and parents in the loop, as we mentioned, and especially when the groups do end. Sometimes I know, I would forget to remind my teachers that I would be finished, and you want to make sure they know. Especially when you have the kiddos who may be saying, hey, I'm still going to group counseling, and they're not going to class. So you want to make sure that you're being clear about that and sharing that information with your teams. Anything you want to add, Kat?
No, I'm going to expand on a lot of this really quick, and I'll give you an examples on our next upcoming slides. This will give you an idea of what we've kind of been talking about a little bit. So with all that being said, there's a lot of planning to do, and I want to kind of talk about why all this planning. I want to hear some success of implementing a small group amongst yourself. If you guys can share a situation where you really went through all this planning and preparing, and you just find this successful story that you really didn't realize that you were going to get out of unless you had a group. Those of you who 60% something plus who ran a group, I know you have a story that sort of pierced your heart, and you remember how amazing that group was or what it impacted those students. Please share amongst yourself in the breakout rooms, and then we'd love to hear some of those stories, because I think with all the work that we do, I know that we're trying really hard individually to meet with every student, but this extends our reach. We just have to work, like you said, not harder, but smarter sometimes. And I know there's a lot of planning, and this is the time right now that we're kind of having that little sort of open window to plan for those upcoming groups. So I'm just thinking in my head, think of something that you can remember when you ran that group, what you can share amongst yourself was a highlight of it.
So you're going to be receiving an invitation from Lorena to join the group, the breakout rooms. Please go ahead and accept it, and we'll be in there for about 8 minutes, and we'll come back. I hope it was a good conversation. I know sometimes I enjoy having that time to connect with others and hear. Does anybody have any good stories or something that was shared in your room that you would love to, or you would like to share? Anything that resonated with you?
Yeah, I would like to share.
Please go ahead.
Okay, so we rather than, we have this group of, select girls that, they have the tendency to hang out, arrive to class late, so it's the same group. So we kind of flipped it and turned a negative into a positive to bring them in and say, hey, we're going to start a group with you. We're going to identify you. We want you guys to identify yourselves. We make them feel special. And then, bring them in and just talk to them, teach them about social skills, life skills, all of the above, to try to motivate them and encourage them. And then while doing that, just check on their current status, how they're doing academically, attendance wise. And then we'll give them printouts to say, here's where you're at. Our common goal is to reach X, Y, and Z within a 6-week period. The one thing that can be a challenge is we don't want to pull students out of the same class 6 times. So I noticed that on our schedule, we have a seminar, which is 12 minutes, and it's on Wednesdays, which deals with kind of like the social aspect anyways.
Mhm.
So maybe if I get, teachers to buy in and say, let me pull them out for 12 minutes of seminar, then they have a 9-minute break. So I can make arrangements to get their food from the cafeteria brought in. So they're still getting fed, and then I can take the attendance. And I think it'll solve a lot of issues.
I love that, Adrian. I think it's creative. We oftentimes,
Creative.
like you have such a big win when you have the students already coming to you and sharing that time with you. So that's huge. You already had half the battle there won. I think that's excellent that you're taking advantage of that. But to be honest with you, Adrian, like I did the same. Like I was always running my groups during lunchtime because I couldn't get the kids out of the class. I felt guilty, and perhaps because I didn't do a really good job explaining to my teachers, or they didn't really see the impact. There was a lot of work that needed to be done on my school side at the time to explain or express the impact the groups had. So for me, I worked around with the lunchtime, and it worked well. I would have to bring in lunch, pizza. Yeah, and that the parents were supportive. Like they always helped me finance that. But yes, you work with what you have and you make it work. So great for sharing that. Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you, Adrian. What school district?
I'm in Santa Ana Unified School District. I'm at a K-8, but the groups that I'm running is basically been middle school at this time, because we have more of a need, I think, within the group setting for middle. The K-5 has been more individual. Just at this particular time.
Thanks for sharing, Adrian.
Absolutely.
Would anybody else like to share? I see a comment from Terry. You could take them out of first and second. Yes. So the revolving schedule. I see that's a very popular one. I know that it works well for some school sites. So yes, I think if you have that opportunity, thank you, Tara. That's a great idea as well. Thank you very much for sharing. So feel free to chime in your ideas. Again, if you have a similar challenge and you've been able to overcome, perhaps what were the tools that you used to get the buy-in of your teachers so they also supported you in your planning of groups in case you needed to interrupt some of the class time. Please share. Mariana, you have a hand raised. You want to go ahead and unmute yourself?
Yes, I just wanted to share with you. This is something that I'm trying new this year to this new campus that I came into this year. Using a rotating schedule where we and this is directly talk to the students and explain to them that in order for their classes not to be impacted like just one specifically, we rotate the schedule. So we'll start, for example, with second period, and then the next week we'll move it to third period, and then the next week to fourth period. So it does not create or negatively impact their academics, and seems to be working well.
Oh, great. Thank you, Mariana, for sharing. So see, it happens. So it is possible. Laura wrote a comment with parents sign off. Has it ever been tried to do groups after school and remind parents to pick up? Yes, I've done that too, Laura. For me, I call it an after school club. And I oftentimes need to bring snacks too to get the kiddos to join, because that can be difficult too. But that's where where the buy-in comes in, and you have to spend a lot of time in that screening to get really their buy-in and have them really see that joining this group and staying after school, which would take away from their free time, would really benefit them. So it takes a lot of skills and on your end to help the students realize that this would be beneficial.
Okay.
All right. Okay. I'm going to resume sharing my screen. And all right, Kat. So this is hopefully the part that you'll find helpful. This is where we will share some samples. Kat, you'll be leading us on that. So let me know when you want me to click on the next ones.
Okay. So informed consent. This is a part that we all already know, but it's important that we also frame it with a positive where we can. I know that some districts have their informed consent through legal. So I always kind of like try to use the informed consent to again, create that buy-in. And I'm going to show you some samples of some stuff that I did. You want to continue? going through the informed consent and why it's important. We all know that it's important to make sure that we have the signature from a parent or a student who's 12 and above, and that's important because of course it's required by law. So that being said, I just want to kind of show you from this point some examples and ways that I've brought informed consent. Again, one of the things that I talked to Luz about earlier is really creating that front loading with that parent. We were talking about making sure that every step of the way, from the informed consent to bringing that student, that they see value in joining the group. So if this sample right here is the invitation, do you see how we kind of already talk to the parent as front loading them before we actually tell them, hey, this is a student that might have some deficiencies. We're really focusing on the positive. This is a positive learning environment. We'd love to have this this group start, and your child will benefit. So immediately from the very beginning, we start off with an invitation to the group. Rather than focusing on the deficiency, we want to start off with something positive as an invitation, and the limited access, right? Because a lot of people want to join the group. So this is only running within this period and time sensitive. So really, we would love for your child to join. And then we follow that up with the informed consent. So if you want to go to the next slide. This again is an example of what I put together during one of the group counseling that we were working on. You know, some of these informed consent, and I know that I've worked at different districts, are very intimidating when they're actually written up with legal. And, you know, that's why the first letter was just the invitation. Some of us have the option of kind of changing our informed consent and using more of that positive framing rather than the negative. So practice new positive behaviors, emphasizing the importance of academics. All that is really important to make sure that the wording is properly changed in a positive light and not so intimidating, so that parents don't feel like, okay, I don't want my child to be part of that. This is going to be a bad thing for them, or is this going to be part of their record? So we really want to kind of, like you said, create that buy-in from just the simple things like the small group counseling informed consent letter that goes out. Another thing is the bottom part. I used to put these so that the parent keeps the top half, and the student would bring this with the signature. This is a group that I ran at Costa Mesa High School. All this will be in the participant guide, so you guys can use some of the wording, verbiage, if you're working on preparing that consent form. If you have some that already are out there and you're asked to kind of update it, these are things that I use, and I wanted to share that with you in hopes that you can kind of get like a group counseling in a box.
Thank you, Kat. I've also added one that OCDE created, and we created over the beginning of the pandemic with more of the legal stuff. So if you're looking for something more formal, maybe not as inviting as yours, because we were really worried about back then about the legal component, but you can check that out and maybe just tailor it to your needs. But you'll see lots of samples, and please feel free, everyone, if you have other samples that you would like to share of what you've used with us, please post them in the chat. Okay.
And then if we go to the next, then the part is the branding and promoting, right? That's real important. Picking the name is important. It's again, not focusing on the deficiencies of the students, naming the group like we were talking about. And I'm going to show you some fun examples. We're working on what we want to see. So these are fun. I know they're extreme, but I did have a couple groups that I would have, like the anxiety group or the lost boys group. We don't want to kind of create a name that a kid has to live up to that's negative. We want to kind of, you know, focus on the stuff that you want to see the outcome, right? So another example, and I know these failing females and all this stuff is a little extreme, but I wanted to make a point in this. These are actual names that we came up with, and you know, the Girls Rock was one of my favorites. Above and Beyond, and the Hall Pass Hangout. That creates that buy-in, and they also feel like connected to it. it's very important that we create a name that the students feel proud of and they can identify with. So that was an important piece of creating your groups. Next slide. And then, of course, if we have open groups, really making sure that there's a minimal time of 2 weeks, I would say, to let students know. So if we have a study skill group, lunch bunch, usually it takes a little time. So 2 weeks out is usually normally for the time that I would post it out, and we would get a lot of students slowly inquiring and finding out and wanting to be part of the group in these open groups. So that's real important, because I've heard of counselors who start a group and then they don't get a lot of buy-in. These are just examples that we, with Nancy, who's probably out there, and last year with the pandemic that we came up with, and she came up with this beautiful tag, which was hot cocoa and fuzzy socks. Who does not want to join that group? So we had a lot of buy-in during the pandemic. And then this is another one pre-pandemic, which was the team discussion group. It's very just simple. These are online examples of the actual flyers that I found. And again, this is just to give you an idea of the strengths for future. This is a boys group, and in this together, it's a grief group. So we're really just helping them see the name of the group is really something they want to identify with, something positive that they can live up to. So this is real important. I say this is almost a critical component of having a kid join the group. They really want to be part of the B group or the friendship group, maybe, or the chilled group. So this is really just examples that we found online. Next slide. Okay, so as you can see, it's a lot of planning, and the lesson planning for me, this was just one example of one of the groups that I ran. It's really there to just give you some kind of like outline. It's not really so you follow it to the T. For the most part, you're just trying to run it as organically as possible. Remember, you're just a facilitator. So for us, as you can see, there's only 35 minutes, maybe 10 minutes to wrap up. Before we even sat down, we were already done. So really, you want to kind of be real intentional with making sure that you have all the parts that you want in a group, because it could easily finish before you even get started. So I basically use this to help me guide my sessions, and I would do that in every session, because there's consistency, the reliability. The students saw that they basically knew what was coming. There wasn't anything new, so there was a little level of comfort. And the funny part about it is, after maybe 4 or 5 sessions, if I missed a beat, if I missed something, they would actually say, Miss Cat, you forgot this, you did forget to do check-in. So they really got to the level of comfort. And this is just an example of us working with 6 students. And as you can see, we only have a very short time before we even got started. Like I said, we were done. So that's just a lesson plan part of it. Next slide. And like Lou said earlier, icebreakers are really, really critical. It's really, it's funny because it's kind of in some ways disguised, right? It's a way of actually teaching those relationship building skills, really creating that, way where the students are interacting in a safe space without feeling like they are threatened by any way of what might another person say. So we're really creating that opportunity for them to kind of connect with their peers in a non-threatening way. This is an example of my icebreaker, and I would just really start off with very like what we call low risk icebreakers to help them slowly build the confidence of interacting. Like, a low risk would be something like, what's your favorite color, rather than what was your worst nightmare, where they feel more exposed. So as time went on, these icebreakers would be ways that I would increase the vulnerability between the students. And I would pick them intentionally, depending on where I felt the group was, whether they were ready for a much more intense icebreaker and they kind of felt more connected. So I would increase the intensity. Next slide. And this is an example.
Oh, just to plug in, I added a ton of different resources for you on Icebreakers. I think over 100 samples that you can pull from on the participant guide.
Yeah, and there is, like I said, you can really modify this and use this as a skill building, because what you're really doing is really helping the students really interact and connect with their peers. Low risk, like I said, they're fun, they're non-threatening, and then upgrade that vulnerability during the group as the trust grows. That really bonds the group in a very slow process, and it actually makes them feel more community focused, right? And facilitate more of that connection within their peers.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, next one. So I asked, should we do an icebreaker at every session? And I do believe that it's really critical, because one of the things that I remember students saying to me, and I know that you've all had this, is I had a student walk in and say, "Hey, Miss Cat, I feel so lonely." And I'm thinking to myself, how can you possibly feel so lonely when you're surrounded by 2,500 students every day? So to me, this was a way that I really wanted to teach, like you said, in a very non-threatening way, just the connection and how important it is to connect along among your peers. So this is what I believe is important in group. Next one.
Never skip the icebreaker. Even if you spend most of the time doing that, I'm sure you're tying it to the goals. The kids love that stuff. So.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we're getting close to the last learning objectives. We're getting ready to close our webinar today, but the last part is to go over some of the data elements that can help you promote your impact, measure and promote your impact of your counseling program, also known as data. So here we have a sample. Actually, I stole this from one of our counselors of the year. Jessica shared this with us. And I would like to extend an invitation. If you have something similar that you have been using to help promote your impact, please share. This is what I think Trish Hatch calls flashlights. You'll find it in her new book that she released. But it's just another way for us as school counselors to promote the work that we're doing, especially now that we got so many school counselors hired. We want to preserve our position. So even more another reason to make sure that you're engaging in your data collecting, and that you're keeping track of that, and you're showing how many students you are impacting, how many students you're working with, all the things that you're doing throughout the year. Keep track of it. Once you have your infographic, whether you create it, I heard someone who's side with Canva. That's right. Canva is an amazing resource. I'm not really good at it. Lorena does the magic for me, but that's a great way of promoting your programs, showing your impact, using the graphs, using it for your to upload on your websites, create your one-page handouts that you can hand out to students or your parents at back to school night, including your reports that you give to your administrators or your school boards. Give that to your district lead so they can see all the good stuff you're doing wherever you can. It has to go anywhere, right? I don't know, what do you do, Kat, to promote it?
And I think this is critical. I think this is the part where we're talking about, sometimes it looks like we're just sitting around just talking to students, but really you want to create credibility of what you do and expand your program. So when I put these out, I'm focusing on like, okay, I do them at the halfway point, which is at the end of the year. And then I do it at the end. The halfway point was one of the things that I really pushed hard, because I felt that during the first part of the year, they were going to start making some decisions, and board members would be meeting and administrators would be meeting. So this was my opportunity to kind of showcase what my work was. Plus, you got to remember, this isn't for you so much. This is to grow the program, grow that school program that you, one day we all envision that we have a ratio of 220, what's the ASCA per counselor. And that's what you're doing it for. You're doing it for the students. So you're advocating for their behalf, not so much for you. And I know it's hard sometimes when we look at that, like, oh, it just sounds like a bragging. But in reality, what we're doing is we're really promoting those students and the services that they need to have to be successful. This was an example of my basically intentional guidance. And when I ran a group there, having your principal have that information, it formalizes what your group is and what the intent is and what you're trying to do. A lot of times when you're running group, it really does look a little chaotic and it looks very organic and it doesn't look like it has any plan. So this was my way to kind of, like you say, create it and through like Trish way to have a plan and to have measurements in place and what the goals were and share it with your admin. Because when a teacher says, hey, I can't see any value in having the student leave 10 or 15 minutes before my class, this is a way for them to have your back. They say, okay, no, I know she's doing actual social emotional learning. So we want to go ahead and formalize that in some ways.
Just a quick reminder, I know I mentioned this 1,000 times, but I need to say it again. Remember, the mindsets and behavior standards are what's going to drive everything you do. So that would be driving your pre and post questions. And again, you're tailoring those questions to help measure your students' attitudes, skills, and knowledge. And this is exactly what you're using to help create those results reports, right? Because you're showing that growth that's happened after your interventions.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So this is your samples from Girls Rock CAD.
Yeah. So I'm just going to go over some of these samples, and I think this was kind of sort of ways that you can get ideas. Remember how we talked about the group criteria when I got all the Fs? So this is where I went ahead and used that data. That's the objective data to kind of create those reports. And if the students who I ran a group with, increase their grades, it would show in our reports. They then became showing, like say, academically disconnected, but then now they're actually showing up to class, being on time. These are examples that I ran of a pilot program in 2013. It seems like yesterday, but it was. So I did this objective survey, and I also shared it with my admin. A lot of the students who joined the group really had low expectations when they first signed up. They really probably were just trying to get out of class. they thought, great, Mrs. Cat's gonna just kind of keep us out of PE and we don't have to do the 6-minute run or whatever it was that they were trying to avoid. But after a while, they realized, wow, I really enjoyed this group, and their grades improved, their friendship skills increased. So these are girls that were really failing in some ways. Emotionally, they were disconnected, and now they felt that they belonged and they were validated among their peers. So they felt more confident. They actually, some of them I remember to this day, went on to be officers at the Navy. They joined after they graduated, things that they never thought. This is one of those special group that remains in your heart forever, because all the work is there in the beginning, but then when you see the outcome of what it represents for them and how impactful it was for them, this is just what they shared amongst themselves as I post. So they really got a lot out of it. And I think this is something that you showcase with your admin, because then it brings value to your work. Another piece is my last one, which was, for them, this is what they felt was important. Is like they felt this was a place where they felt accepted. So the last one was, and I'm going to show you this one. I thought that was funny because a lot of people wanted to continue on. 6 weeks wasn't enough. They wanted 12 weeks, another group, another series. So you get them hooked. These are just comments that they wrote. And I think like Luis was sharing, these are things that you share among your admin when they're planning in February and they're making decisions. Your data is out there and they're really taking all those pieces into consideration. So this is just stuff that I would use as much as possible. So again, we're just gonna like review really quickly. We talked about interesting topics, grief, social emotional learning, things that you feel that you see like that in your school that is happening, that you can create a group that would benefit the students. You want to do the pre-screening, the informed consent, and like Luis says, plan. A lot of this takes a lot of planning, but once you facilitate it and it gets going, it really moves fairly quickly. You want to pick the times where they're not doing, like we say, testing, or you have a 2-week break. You really have to look at your calendar and really figure out which is the best, where you have consistent 6 weeks, and then collect the data. And the last and most important is really having fun with the kids, and really bonding with them is really the critical component. So I hope you guys know we really appreciate you coming out here and talk and hanging out with us, because I know you're busy. So this is our last aha moment. Like what new idea or reminder about a small group counseling are you taking away today? And if you can share with the chat and amongst yourself, that would be awesome. We really appreciate you guys being here. We really know how busy you are. I've tried to pick a time that I figure you wouldn't be as busy, because I know after 12, it goes crazy, right?
No, thank you. No, Kat, thank you for joining me today. Group counseling is one of my favorite things, but I've been away from, practicing for 2 years. So your insight, it's very helpful. And I know that things are different now with, the current challenges. So thank you for being part of this webinar today. The last ask I have is if you would please, I have created a survey for us. I would love your feedback. Let me know how helpful this webinar was today. Give me ideas of future topics. If there's more information you would like to learn about, or maybe go a little deeper, let me know. The survey will take less than 2 minutes, I promise. And I also, Lorna will be posting a couple of links. One of them is if you want to connect with us, with other colleagues, we do have the New School Counselor Collaborative that is happening throughout the year. So take a look at that. And then the School Counselor Coffees. Both are, opportunities for you to just come together. Like I said, school counselors thrive through collaboration. So let's come together, brainstorm, share resources. Let's just help each other out, because there is stuff going on out there. You guys are doing amazing work, I know. So let's support each other and share the wealth. We'll stick around if you have any questions. I love the comments I see here. Planning. Yes, thank you. So please go through the participant guide. There's tons of information. I'm sorry that I inundated you with resources, but I figure it's better to have more.
This is one-stop shop group counseling. Come here because we know how busy you are.
Yes, so Sandra, we have uploaded the presentation to the participant guide, and we'll be uploading the recording after this too. So actually, I'll stop the recording and stick around for questions. I know that you all have a busy schedule, so thank you again, and feel free to jump off if you need to, but we'll stick around if you need